Well, Happy New Year to ALF listeners and welcome to the very first episode of the podcast for 2024. Now, much of Eastern Australia over the last month or so has had it pretty tough with floods and bushfires and cyclones and all kinds of things going on. So if you're in one of those zones that has been affected by these harsh weather conditions, I hope that you're safe and I hope that your family are also safe. And our hearts go out to you and our thoughts are with you. And of course, hopefully very soon you'll be back on the water doing a spot of fishing. And speaking of fishing, I guess it's time we get today's episode underway. And it's a great episode too. We've got Deethy today hosting a brilliant conversation with none other than Simon Cross from Crossfire Lures. And if you've ever fished surface lures or flathead, or you've ever thought about it, or you're just curious about what it's all about, this episode is absolutely jam-packed with hot tips and great advice for doing exactly that. Not just with Crossy's lures, but just quietly. I reckon you've probably got rocks in your head if you're thinking about doing this style of fishing and you haven't got a few Crossfires in your box. So folks, settle in and enjoy the ALF goodness that comes with this interview.
This is the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, where our mission is to help everyday sports fishers experience extraordinary lure fishing. If next level fishing is your dream, then let us provide the tools and information that will bring that dream to life. Tune in as our expert hosts chat with Australia's best anglers and share their tips for success. Then check out our website. It's one of Australia's largest and most popular online fishing resources. But first, catch today's episode as resident ALF host, kayak tournament champ and brim whisperer Andrew Deeth brings the next instalment of lure fishing magic to your earbuds.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. I'm Andrew Deeth and usually I'm here to talk about brim, but I'm here to talk about something different today. Late last year, for those of you who listened to the last show I did for the year, I said that one of my things for 2023 was to get back into fishing Crossfire lures. And as my tournament year's gone through, I actually haven't done a lot of it till recently. And I pulled out my 195 Crossfire and went down and hit a couple of flathead down in the hacking. And I had a couple of questions and I thought, you know what? I think I should get on to Simon Cross and have a chat. With that in mind, I've reached out to Crossy and he's agreed to come back on the show and to have a chat. So this is who we're going to talk to. So I'd like to welcome back to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, Mr. Simon Cross. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Mate, absolute pleasure to talk to you, to be honest. It's been a few years since you've been on, and I just listened to that episode 116 today, which in itself is a fascinating show. But, mate, we've got a lot to get through tonight.
Yeah, we certainly do. There's a lot of stuff that we've discovered. We've got new theories. We've cemented old theories. We've changed up some of the gear that we're using. We've got a better idea of some of the equipment that's available on the market. So, yeah, we've got plenty to talk about, that's for sure.
We do. And look, one of the things I spoke to you about just before hitting record is we want to do a bit of a rundown for people who have not fished them before and give them an idea where to start, and then get into the more high-end things, a bit of flathead behaviour theory or ideas and all that sort of stuff. Mate, I reckon we go back through, and I think we might start with the Reel It In challenge that you did down in Mallacoota a week or so ago. And we might have a talk about what you threw down there and why you threw it and how your competition went.
Yeah, Mallacoota was great. We really enjoyed ourselves down there. It's a great system, and the comp was a great comp. There was a real sense of community inside the other competitors that were there. The organisers are all over it. It was just so much fun. And we'd never fished it. One of our crew member, Matty, he had been down there for about 6 hours about a week before, and that pretty much sums up our pre-fish.
Right.
We arrived and we didn't really know the layout that well. We had a bit of an idea of where some good flats were, and we just did what we always do. We went to the flats and we started to look for any sort of structure, how those flats were made up. So we were looking for life on the flats, nipper holes or bassiabbies they call them down there. We were looking for mullet or whiting moving around the place, and we started to target those areas straight off. So we were fishing flats that were somewhere around underwater. So it wasn't very deep water, and we just started throwing 195 straight up. 195 tends to always bring our bigger fish, and we were in competition mode, so we were throwing 195.
Yeah.
What we did find was that those fish were holding on those flats, but all systems a little bit different. And this one had, if I can call it, striation, so long, narrow stretches of darker sand sitting up on top of the lighter sand. So you'd have almost a bare sand and a dark strip, and then light sand and then a dark strip. And those fish were sitting in and on the edges of that light, darker sand. And it really, what it's teaching us is just how those fish will utilise even the slightest difference in the bottom contour, the bottom makeup, to set up their attack point.
All right. So basically, with over those flats, were you still focused on the sort of 300 or maybe 400 mil of water?
We were. It wasn't by design. That just happened to be the depth of that flat we were on. Now, that flat is not uniformly 300 mil all the way through. You get little bars that rise up in it, and you'll get tiny little gutters as you move on to a different part of it. So when we're talking about focusing on structure, we're really talking about any sort of structure. And that structure doesn't necessarily have to be a rock or a log or anything like that. It can just be that change in bottom strata colour. So when you're looking for big flathead on the flats, you want to be looking at that strata and seeing what it's doing. If you're seeing an area where it's got a lot of nipper holes or bassiabby holes, and you've got little hollows and stingray feeding holes and brim holes and all sorts of things like that, that's the sort of area you really want to be looking at. When you start seeing stingrays, you know you're in the right area because they inhabit the same environment. So stingrays are always a good sign. And we notice also that if you start to see a few jellyfish around, it tends to be an indicator that you're in the warmer part of water. Water temp is fairly important. And during the comp, we did have to run around and find those flats that were holding slightly warmer pockets.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. We were finding a few fish right on the edges, but a lot of those fish were 20, 30 metres up inside the flat on the top. And people often say to me, am I best to target the weed edges? Yes, sure. You'll get fish sitting on the edges, but you'll also get fish sitting out in what would normally a lot of people would call pretty nondescript area. I had one of the competitors down at Malakuta ask me, why do they come up into the shallows? And my answer was, well, why are they flat?
Yeah, okay.
They're built for it. Yeah. They're made for it. They're ideally suited to that shallow water environment. Okay. So we were targeting the fish with the 195. We were getting some good fish. And this is another thing that sort of we need to touch on is that whenever you're fishing a surface lure, be it a crossfire or be it some other different lure, be prepared and be ready to accept that you're not going to hook up to every strike. And that brings us back really to how those fish see the lure. And I've spoken on this before, and I spoke about it in the previous podcast, that their eyesight is not the best, and they always try and hit the lure where they think it is. Now, if we don't sync up how we're working that lure with how they're going to attack at that point of attack, you'll quite often miss them. And I've said it 100 times, if you get a fish that strikes at that lure and you don't feel him on the lure itself, he's missed it completely, finish your retrieve as normal, but cast back over that fish as soon as you can, because 8 out of 10 times that fish will hit it again and you will pick that fish up.
Yeah, I've found that to be exactly right. It's been a surprising thing coming from brim fishing that fish often won't come back. Sometimes they do. But the flathead, often you'll see them hit. They'll swim down to the bottom and then turn around and go again on the same cast or on the next cast. Yeah,
that's right. And it's just one of those things. Surface luring, well, let's put it this way. When flathead attack a prey item, their success rate is not always 100%, even in the wild. So when we're using an artificial lure and we're using an artificial bait to entice that strike, every hit is not going to be successful. There will be misses. That's just part of nature. We can't change that. But more often than not, if you're getting hits and you're missing them, you shouldn't be missing too many. You might miss a fish here and then you'll pick up the next fish. If you're getting a lot of missed hits, slow your roll. You're running your lure too fast. You're not giving them enough time to line that lure up and do the calculation in their head to get a successful attack.
Okay. That probably leads me to the next question. In this comp at Mallacoota, you're fishing these flats areas. How was your retrieve?
Okay, yeah. We used a couple of different retrieves. There was 4 in the team. There was myself, Matty, Paddo and Mick Martin. And everybody's using a slightly different retrieve because we were trying to find out what retrieve was working best on the day. What we ended up with was I was casting the lure out, and this is the number one thing. Distance is king. You must get that lure as far from you as possible. The further you can get it from you, the more hookups you will get. We were casting out. I was letting the lure hit the water. It was resting for 2 to 3 seconds, and then I'd give it 1 or 2 short jabs. Because quite often when that lure lands, that splash will draw attention from the fish, and any fish in that close vicinity will turn to look to see what's going on. If you do 5 or 6 big jabs and that lure skips out of sight, you've basically missed that opportunity of enticing that fish. And it's surprising how many strikes you'll get on those very long casts.
Okay.
So right at the end of your cast, your strike might come in the first 1 to 2 metres of that cast retrieve. What we're doing is we're doing 1, 2, 3, and then a pause, and then a 1, 2, 3, and then a pause, and we just kept doing that. It's a rinse and repeat. Throw it out, work your water, and try and fan cast around your water. Always have the best position is right at the bow of the boat. If you've got an electric and you're using that to keep yourself in position, that's the primo spot. You're always on that fresh water and you're casting ahead of yourself and you're retrieving it back to you. So that's the primo position. You can cast out to the sides of the boat as long as your drift speed or your electric speed is not too high.
Sure.
You should try and stay reasonably parallel with your lure all the time.
Yeah. Okay. And with the retrieve, if you've got your 3 short jabs and a pause, how long's the pause? Are you counting to 5? Are you counting to 10? Or is there a thought pattern there?
Yeah, there is. Depending on what my water temp's doing. If I'm seeing a low water temp, I'll probably leave it there for 10 to 15 seconds. Sure. If I'm seeing a high water temp and we're seeing a lot of activity and there's a lot of fish and we've been getting strikes, then I shorten that time.
Okay. So tell us, how did the competition play out for you?
We had the Dash for Cash shootout on the Friday, the day we arrived. Yep. We had high wind, so that it was blowing pretty hard. It was running at about 32 or 35 kilometres per hour. It wasn't overly windy for us. You know, we're quite used to that sort of conditions. But what we were finding is that wind was pushing the bait into the northern side of the system. So they were going, all those little bait fish were being pushed up into the little bays. So we weren't really working the flats on that first day. We were working those bays.
Okay.
And we did okay. We got third in that shootout, and our best fish for the day was 89.
Wow. Cracking fish.
89 centimetres. So it was a nice fish. Yeah. But they were hard to find. We did struggle a bit. We had little spats of rain coming through, and, it was not ideal conditions. But wind won't put them off. They don't mind wind. Wind can be your friend. You can use it to increase the length of your casts, so you just get the wind at your back and you can increase that cast by quite a margin, especially with a big lure like the 195. Yeah, so that worked out really well for us, and then it gave us a bit of an idea. Well, while we were out doing that, we had a bit of a look at some of the other flats around the lower lake, and we started to make a bit of a plan, and we formulated a plan, and then we basically implemented that plan sort of day one, first thing.
Okay.
So we hit those flats. We found that striated dark water and we were picking up a few fish. And then we just kept working that and scattered it amongst those few fish. At the end, either end of the smaller fish were the bigger fish.
Yeah, okay.
And that sort of brings us to a bit of a theory that's cemented itself for us.
Okay.
And for me in particular is that when you're chasing these big fish on the flats, and you hit a big fish and you've landed that big fish, don't move off that area.
Okay.
Release that fish and drift down maybe 10 feet or 15 feet and start casting again, because what we're seeing is we're seeing these big fish, generally the 2 biggest fish out of a loosely aggregated school will be close together. They won't be very far apart.
Okay.
And that brings us to a bit of fish behaviour.
Yeah.
And this is a pet thing of mine, really, is thinking about fish behaviour and especially flathead behaviour.
Yeah.
So what we're noticing is that inside the flathead, we've got to stop thinking about them as individual fish randomly scattered across a flat. That's not the case at all. What we're seeing is a loosely aggregated school that has a definite hierarchy inside.
Right.
So what we'll see is the biggest female of that group, or that school, will take up the primo feeding position.
Mm-hmm.
Now, nearby to her will be the next dominant female.
Yeah.
And then you'll go down the food chain inside that school. So then you'll start seeing below them, you'll see 60s and 50s, and then you'll be down into the tiddlers.
Yeah.
So there is this hierarchy set up on the flat, and there is can I call it an etiquette amongst these fish? There is a knowledge, I should say. There is a knowledge amongst these fish of who's who in the zoo.
Right.
And they have bumped each other on that flat. And that dominant fish has marked that territory, and she's held that territory. And the bigger fish around her know that she's the top dog of that area.
Yeah.
And the small fish will have started to twig to that as well. And there's a lot of people that will have the theory that the big flathead actually hunt down and eat small flathead. Yeah, they do. But we ask ourselves, and we should always ask ourselves questions when we're angling and when we're fishing, and this is how we learn and grow as anglers. And what we should be asking ourselves is, okay, why are these small fish so attracted to them? Is it simply because they need a food source, or is there another story to it?
Right.
And there is another story, and that story is the animals that you're seeing being eaten by those bigger fish, we think, and this is theory, we think is that they are inexperienced fish inside the hierarchy of that loosely aggregated school. And what they've done is they've blundered into a dominant fish's area.
Yep.
And how does that dominant fish protect that area? It eats them. That's how it deals with the problem. And it's a competition problem.
Yeah.
Now, when those fish come into spawning, they will allow those smaller males in because they're starting to spawn, and it's one of those few times of the year that they'll tolerate.
Yeah.
And that's more of a chemical reaction within the fish.
Yeah, okay.
We've seen of late a lot of drone footage coming up, and we're seeing drone footage and behaviour that hasn't been available to me before. And it's really interesting stuff, because what we're seeing is one particular piece of footage was two large fish moving across a flat, one fish slightly larger than the next fish, okay? So we look at that and we go, all right, we've got a dominant female and possibly the next dominant female. So we've got one more dominant, one less dominant than her. And the least dominant fish was displaying fin rubbing.
Okay.
So she's coming up to that alpha fish and she's rubbing fins to it and she's bumping it. And that's a little bit like, we think it's a little bit like a subservient behaviour, much like how a dog will roll over on its belly.
Right, okay.
So it's a behavioural thing.
Yeah.
And you might say, okay, what do we do with this knowledge? We know that when you catch one big fish, there's another big fish near it.
Yeah.
If you're catching smaller fish, stick at it, because you're either moving up the school in size or you're moving down, and you adjust your direction depending on what your captures are.
Yeah.
So if you're getting 50s and suddenly you're getting 20s, you're at the wrong end.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how it works. And it was during Malakuta, it was identifying water movement, and we were trying to, in our mind, picture where the dominant feeding places were. So we're looking for the striated bottom, but we're also looking for little tiny channels that might be, say, 150 mils deeper.
Yep.
Or something close to a drop-off where those bigger fish can disappear into if they feel threatened.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's all a bit of a mixture of how you target fish on the flats and how you identify that area.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. You answered the questions as they were coming into my mind. I was like, okay, what do you do with that information? And it's exactly like you said. If you catch one big fish, there's a chance there's another one there. And I'm not sure whether the drone footage you referred to was the one from Nev's Fishing, because that was unbelievable on YouTube.
Yeah, there's been Nev's, JC Shenanigans, and a few others that have been sending me a bit of stuff.
Yeah, cool.
And we're seeing this behaviour again and again. And it's not a one-off. We see it a lot. One piece that we see a lot is flathead hanging around stingrays. And this is pretty old knowledge for us. We knew this years ago. Flathead will follow stingray around trying to pick up anything they might scare up.
Right.
So that's probably one of the reasons, if you see stingrays around, you're in the right area.
Okay, just to clarify that, so if you've got a big stingray heading across the flat, Are you saying that there'll be or the potential for a flathead to be actually just in its, I guess, its wake following? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you see a big a big stingray feeding, you'll see that plume of mud and sand and everything drifting down with the current. Quite often there will be flatheads sitting in that plume.
Really?
And they're actually sitting there waiting to see what comes past them.
Yeah, okay.
So they're highly opportunistic, but they're highly dynamic as well. The idea that they just sit on the bottom with their mouths open, I think, is well and truly debunked these days. I can recall a particular incident in Ballina one year where I had seen a very dark shadow come across the flat, and it was a very clear day. I had bright sunshine, the water was gin clear. I looked out and I saw this dark shadow and I thought, oh, it's a stingray. And then it stopped and I was looking at it, and then it started again and I got it closer and I'm still looking at it, and then it did a circle. I thought, that's not a stingray. It got closer and closer, and it was a bloody big flathead. It was about an 83, I think. And it was going to every little piece of structure on that flat, and it was sniffing around it. It went to a clump of seaweed and it went around that. It went to a stick poking up and it went around that. So that fish was moving and actively hunting as it moved.
Yeah.
As it got within casting range, I put a cast into it and we nailed that fish. It hit it straight away.
Yeah.
It was keyed. It was lit up, as we call it. She was ready to feed and she was looking to feed.
Yeah.
So they're not just that half-buried fish all the time. They do that quite a lot, no doubt. But we've got to understand how little we understand. There's so much we don't know about this fish, and it's really one of the bread and butter species of Australia, and our understanding of it's quite limited.
Yeah. Like I was saying to you before we hit record, when I first started using Crossfires, like the very first day, I went out and had just a session. I think I had maybe 1 or 2 hits, but the first hit was just magnificent in terms of what it did. It just smashed this massive lure off the surface. And to be honest, I was quite shocked. I didn't get the hook set, but it got me hooked from the first day. It was very exciting.
Yeah, it's very visual stuff. And it's been, because of that visual aspect, it gives us the opportunity to learn so much more. And it was from those surface strikes where I could see what the fish were doing that we worked out that their eyesight's not so good.
Yeah.
We also worked out that when they attack from the rear, sometimes you'll see a fish sink away from the lure.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will think that fish has rejected that lure. It hasn't. It just wants to reposition itself. And I covered that in the first podcast.
Yeah.
Another thing we've picked up just recently too, which has been really mind-bending, was that I had one very large fish that I hunted for 10 days.
Okay.
Solely on this one fish. In 10 days, I hooked her 4 times and I lost her 4 times.
Wow.
I couldn't work out what the hell was going on, why I wasn't staying connected. I just couldn't get my head around it.
Yep.
So I got a mate to come out with me and have a crack at her and see if by watching what he's doing, I could concentrate more on what the fish was doing. And it was worth its weight in gold, because what we found was that fish wasn't opening its mouth to strike the lure. It was using the underside of its jaw to slap the lure downwards in an effort, we think, to disable it.
Right. Wow.
And that was a real eye-opener for us. And I went, bloody hell, I would never have imagined that that's something that they do.
Yeah.
And yet here it was. I watched it in real time and I could not believe it. And I thought, how often do they do that? And now that we're aware of that sort of behaviour, I'm more attuned to watching for it. And I haven't seen it a lot more. I've seen it maybe 3 times more, but it's generally only from very large fish.
Yeah.
Because they have the weight and the power. And I think it's really a way that they can stop a bait from fleeing without having to expend energy to hunt it down. So they just come in and they knock it out. It's easy to eat it if it's knocked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, that's just crazy. And then we thought, that's not the only fish that does it. We know that tailor will come in and tail snip.
Yep. Yeah.
We know the mackerels will come in and tail snip. We know that billfish will come in and stun fish.
Yeah.
We know the thresher shark will use its tail. So again, how little we understand of this animal.
Yeah. See, one thing that I noticed, and it surprised me, is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but you hear their jaw go clap. It just goes whack. And I think it's their mouth shutting, but maybe I've got that wrong. Does that ring any bells for you?
It does, and we haven't been able to work out whether it's always the mouth slamming shut or whether that's actually the underside of the jaw slapping the top of the water.
Yeah, that's because what you just said flew against what I was thinking because, maybe it is them just trying to belt it under and just, like you said, disable it, get it off the surface.
Yeah, it's a mind bender. It's just, it endears these fish to me more and more the more I learn about them. They are such a dynamic fish and they are just incredible to watch and to observe and to learn about. And we see other things. Another example would be just prior to a strike, if you can get a good bead on a fish, just before it strikes, that fish will imperceptibly just move forward a little bit.
Right.
And people think, okay, it's a false start, or is it a bit like a cat wanting to get ready to pounce? But there is another possibility that we're thinking about, because I've seen a fish do that same movement with its head facing away from the lure.
Right.
And I thought, well, why the hell's it done that? And being a curious sort of a bastard and always wanting to find an answer and to try and figure stuff out, what we think is happening is as that fish is moving forward, it's not actually a pre-attack sequence. What we're seeing is that fish changing its body posture, and what could be happening is it's actually allowing the scales on its body to lift ever so slightly to allow more vibration through the lateral line.
Oh, okay. So it's trying to feel it.
Yeah, and I've had fish turn around and hit lures at 180 degrees and they've never, they might have seen it. They do have fairly good vision conically and they do see silhouettes very well.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those other things that we're looking at, we're noticing and we're going, right, that's interesting. And, what the hell do we do with that knowledge? How does it help us? I suppose you can say, okay, we know that fish is turned on, it's clicked on, it's ready to hit something.
Yeah.
So it's one of those behaviours that we can't quite get a handle on, and it'll be some time before we can really figure out exactly what's going on. But if you look at it this way, the information coming in through the lateral line, how do they use that sense? Can they turn it on and off? Can they heighten it? And when I say heighten it, much like we do when we walk past a bakery or a coffee shop.
Yeah.
You watch anybody walk past a bakery, first thing they do is they tilt their nose upwards and they breathe in.
Yeah.
That's heightening sense. And I'm not saying that fish is trying to smell like we smell a bakery, but it's the same concept.
Yeah.
Is it just moving that little shuffle forward so it's getting those senses, and that's one of the sequences it goes through to prepare it to allow that vibration to come into the body?
Yeah.
We're not sure, but certainly interesting stuff to ponder.
Definitely. It's a great observation. Let's circle back to the competition. I like it because we're covering a lot of the things I want to cover. I really want to teach people how to use these lures to best effect, and I think we're doing that. But how did the end of your day one go, and the rest of your competition? We
had our first 10 fish. So the competition's parameters are your 10 best fish.
Sure.
We had 10 fish in the boat by lunchtime day one.
Nice.
We thought, okay, everything from this point's an upgrade. We got a couple of upgrades in the afternoon, but not too many. That bite window had closed.
Yeah.
And once again, we saw that even though Malakuta is not such a tidal system, that bite window was still quite heavily tied to tide times.
Yeah.
So we finished up our day and we went back to the boat ramp, and we were pretty nervous and we thought, we haven't done that. We had a couple of 80s and a couple of 70s and a few 60s in the boat and a few smaller fish.
Sure.
And we thought, okay, I wonder if we've done enough. And then we were talking to some of the other competitors and we bumped quite a few that hadn't turned a scale the whole day.
Wow.
And we went, okay, no, we've done all right. And then that night when the results of day one came out, we were running second.
Yeah.
And then day two, we basically hit the same flats again, and we dropped two absolute horse fish straight up.
Ouch.
So that was a bit of a blow. And then we picked up a few upgrades, and then we decided that we'd move off that flat. We'd punished it enough. We were going to find another flat. So we moved up to another one, which is a big circle sand flat with a weed fringe. And we had noticed that a lot of the bait in the system were quite big mullet.
Okay.
So we hadn't had too many strikes leading up to this flat. We thought, okay, let's change things up. Maddie Voice Set had said bigger profile. They want bigger profile. Okay, let's do that. So Maddie tied on a 230 and about the third cast hit an 89 centimetre fish.
Wow.
And he was spot on. That's what they wanted. They wanted a bigger profile.
Okay. So let's just double back there. So for the listeners that are not familiar with all the lures, so your 195, and we never discussed this, but it's basically a big bent minnow style lure. What's the difference between a 195 and a 230 in terms of, I guess, size and volume and hooks and all that sort of stuff?
Okay, the 195's 48 grams. The 230 is 89.
Wow.
So quite a bit heavier.
Yep.
Yeah, obviously 230 millimetres long, 195 long.
Yep.
Action is exactly the same.
Yep.
Doesn't change. The 230, you do have to be a bit more aggressive with it.
Yeah.
Although that fish that Maddie got, that aggressive retrieve did get that fish's attention, but that fish actually crocodiled up under the lure and sat there looking at it.
Right.
So Maddie paused that lure and then just gave it a little shimmy,
Yeah.
a little jiggle, and she came up and she just engulfed it.
So you sucked it in.
Yeah, and we had her well hooked. We knew she was in the bag pretty much.
Nice. And but the 230, has that got stingers on it out of the box?
No, it comes with 6.0 singles.
Oh, okay.
But if I was using, it's not designed for flat. It's not what we use for flat. We use it for coral trout.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to that too.
I'll come back to that in a minute. But we normally just change over to trebles. You certainly can use stingers on it. That won't affect the action at all. And that's one of the beauty of the Crossfires is that you can play with weight in your hooks and your rings, and you can add extra rings, and you can do all sorts of things. You can add a hook to the nose.
Yeah, wow.
It won't destroy the action, depending on what you do to the nose. Bigger hooks in the belly and the rear, all that will do will change your rate of rise.
Okay.
So you can slow it down, or you can, you'll speed it up, whatever you want to do.
Sure.
But yeah, you want reasonable hooks on the 230 because it is a big mouthful.
Yeah. The one that I have, one of those only, it's still in its packet, has singles on it. So what trebles should I put on?
Yep. Trebles, I always like to use BKK.
Yep.
And I have been playing around with a few hooks by Jabbers out of Adrenaline Outdoors, the Stab Mothers. So you're probably wanting using, say, a 3.0 or 4.0 treble.
Okay.
So quite a big hook.
Yeah.
Because you want those hook points not to be hidden in under the bait. You don't want that belly hook hidden in under the profile of the lure itself, the width of that lure.
Sure.
So you want quite a big treble. That's why we put them on. So you want a treble that's going to protrude enough from the belly.
Yeah.
And certainly on the tail, you can use a single if you wanted to, or you can use assists.
Okay. All right. So back to the competition. You've changed it up to the 230 and you put an 89 centimetre in the boat. How'd the rest of your day play out?
Not too badly. I think we got another 70, and then we upgraded a few smaller fish. A few these went up to 60 and 65s and things like that.
Yeah.
We did get 2 tailor,
okay,
but they were not bad tailor. They were 65 centimetres, and the other one was 66, I think.
Yeah, big tailor.
But they're not bad tailor. But they certainly weren't the biggest caught in the comp, that's for sure, because I don't think we won a prize for that.
Wow, they're crazy.
Yeah,
fish.
surprising that the Crossfire is super effective on tailor. We've got a number of customers in Western Australia targeting really big tailor on the 195 and the 230.
Okay.
There's a few people in Queensland targeting big tailor on the 230, and I've even done some custom weight jobs and paint jobs for people chasing them up there.
All right. And then, so you upgraded, mate, had a few upgrades, and where'd you end up in the end?
We maintained that position 2 from the first day. We never moved off it.
Sure.
We were, by the end of the comp, I think we were 15 centimetres behind the leader.
Wow.
So we weren't far behind them, but they got a beautiful fish of 92.5.
Yeah, great fish.
Which was a great effort. And they did quite well on some of their other sizes too. Yeah, they were hard to beat. They had it pretty well nailed. The system, I think, if we'd spent more time down there, we'd probably have a better idea.
Sure.
But I was really pleased with their result coming second. That was a great result, I thought.
Yeah. No.
But yeah, we held on to second position and maintained that right to the end.
Yeah, no, it's a great result, particularly since you'd not fished the system. And there's a lot of people who do just chase flatheads. That's a great result. All right. So a couple of questions I wrote down while you were talking. What are your thoughts on colours, and did you change it up throughout the comp down there?
Oh, we certainly, colours are important. I'll keep changing colours until I start to get results. Now, in the 195 range, I don't have 100 colours. We've only got about 9.
Sure.
I don't need 100 colours, but each colour has its place.
Okay.
So if I'm just prospecting new ground, I'd probably use a pearl white or a firehead, which is a red head, like the old Qantas colour.
Yep.
It's probably the best prospecting colour. If I've got bright sunshine and my fish are quite scattered, I'll use the silver flash, which is a reflective silver finish. It's got polished shaved aluminium in the paint itself.
Yep.
If I think that the system is the fish are feeding on whiting, I'll use the sandy, which is our whiting imitation.
Yep.
If I think they're feeding on mullet, we use the mullet, which is obviously a mullet imitation. If I'm looking to try and change things up and elicit a slow bite, I'll go to a UV colour.
Okay.
So we do a UV in a pilchard pattern, and we do a UV in our own pattern called a dragon blood. So that's a paint. I had a rush of blood to the bloody head and started making my own paint. I don't know why I did it. But anyway, I've done it now.
Fair enough.
But what it's done is it's allowed us to create colours unique to Crossfire because we're the only ones with the recipe for that paint.
Sure.
So we're using Australian pigments.
Yep.
We bring the pigments in and we mix it up in-house in the workshop.
Yep.
And then we apply that. And what we're achieving with that is some really interesting stuff. We're starting to play around with UV changeable. What I mean when I say changeable is that the colour of that lure in your hand might be a sort of a Taylor green, that sort of a greeny, bluey silver colour.
Yep.
When that lure hits the water, wherever sunlight strikes that lure, it turns violet.
Okay.
Yeah, we're experimenting more and more with these colours.
Yeah.
The pilchard UV that we do, it's from Australian Pigments again, and we do the flanks in a sort of a blue, green, gold colour.
Yeah, yeah.
And what we're getting there is we're getting a really sparkly finish that sort of almost has a wet fish look to it all the time.
Right.
So it's been super effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, so getting back to the colour issue, yeah, so we'll change colours up for sure until we find what they want. And that's why we carry a range of colours in the boat with us. One of our best producers in the last 2 seasons has been a colour we call Pale Rider, which is chartreuse and sky blue.
Yeah.
So there's no bait fish that colour, but it really flicks a switch in big flathead.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I'm looking at the colour and I'm like, it wouldn't be my first choice. So it's quite interesting that it's done very well. But that's fishing, is it? You don't know sometimes.
Yeah, but change it up until you get results and work out what the fish want. And I suppose that's the beauty of fishing local water. You learn so much about your local area, what colours are working there, and that's why it always pays. Go to your local tackle store, ask some questions if you're a visitor. If you're in a new area, it never hurts to go and hook up with a charter business for a day and go and talk to them. They're always a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great way of, I think we spoke before as well when you were making the 150s or the 155s. I was up with Mark Saxon on his charter service up there as it was, and yeah, got a 92 in one session. And the session, he said, before we start, he said, mate, the tides aren't great, the moon's not great, everything's not great, but we still got a cracking fish.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It doesn't surprise me, really. It's been such an effective lure, and it's slowly carving out a little niche for itself in Australia as the gun flathead lure, and really the results speak for themselves. At the comp at Malakuta, we came second, but Matty Boycett, one of our crew member, took out overall champion for the comp.
Nice.
And he actually won the Reel It In Australian and Southern New South Wales previous to that as well.
Really? On Crossfire? That's crazy.
Yeah. He's no slouch. He's a machine, though. He's exhausting the fish with. He never stops.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good thing. There's a good thing. Look, I found that really interesting about colours because, honestly, I've had, I think, the sandy colour and the silver, sandy and silver flash, the red head and the white, and that's all I've really used, and I pretty much just tied one on. But, yeah, I'll definitely have to cycle through the colours that I've got.
Yeah, well, we've done some other ones as well. So we started to do a few dark colours. And this goes back to the silhouette theory, that they really seek a silhouette at low light. And we've done a black we call Galaxy. It's a really nice pattern. It's got a load of different coloured fleck in it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it picks up any moonlight or light from under bridges or anything like that. Just gives it enough sparkle so it stands out. And we've done another one we call Firestorm, which is a black with red, a yellow and orange stripes going through it. It's been quite handy. It's actually been an absolute killer colour on bass, Australian bass.
Right.
And we do another one we call Copperhead,
Yep.
and it's another dark one with a grey scale pattern on it,
Yep.
and a black head. So we use those lures in low light when we're looking to try and when they're no longer so interested in colour but more about silhouette, and those dark colours will show up better.
Okay. That is a great tip. All right. I think we've covered the competition pretty well. Another couple of questions that it did raise for me, which I think is probably important with these big fish, is fish handling. So I was curious to know what sort of a net you like and how you actually manage a fish of sort of 70, 80 or 90 centimetres. What do you think's important?
Okay, as far as nets go, a bloody big one would be my advice. Bigger the better.
Yeah.
Get as bigger as you can in the boat,
Yeah.
and still be comfortable with it. Bigger nets give you more space to try and drift those bigger fish into, especially if you're fishing solo like I do a lot. So I like the rubber style knotless nets. They don't damage your fish too much, and we find them pretty durable, and there's a lot of different ones on the market. So they're a good option.
Sure.
Once you've caught your fish, try and leave it in the water for a little bit.
Yeah.
Just until it stops thrashing about. It's never a good idea to bring a big thrashing fish into a boat.
Yeah.
And there's a few reasons for that. One, it's pretty detrimental to rod tips.
Yes.
And two, you've got a bloody big heavy lure swinging around in that mouth, and those hooks are sharp. They're normally BKK or VMC, so they're pretty sharpish. It is important that we look after those fish. A gloved hand for releases and things like that. Wet your brag mats down. Try not to hold your fish up by the jaw, because you're dislocating all the connections right through the body, especially just behind the head. So be careful of that. Fingers out of gills. They're a valuable sports fish. They're a valuable asset to everyone, and it's important that we do the right thing to look after them, and we don't knock them around too much. Certainly, lip grips, whilst a handy tool, are not the be-all to end-all, and are not a tool that you can use willy-nilly, because they're used incorrectly, you'll actually kill a fish with them.
Yeah, okay.
If you're not too sure on lip grips, don't use them at all. You don't really need them with flathead. A gloved hand will protect you from any teeth that they have.
Yeah.
So, lip grips, best leave them at home.
Sure.
Big nets, look after your fish, cradle that weight of that fish when you're taking a photo. Wet rags, minimise time out of the water. Just general common sense things, really.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that covers it. I think, like you said, a decent glove is a good thing. I found in holding that big 92 or 93 or whatever it was with Mark Saxon, that thing bit down really hard on my hand. It surprised me how hard the bite was. But yeah, so a glove's a good thing. Yeah,
the gloves, I do quite a bit of filming of releases underwater. And the glove, the beauty of the glove is that while you're holding your fish in the water and reviving it, just giving him a little swim or her a little swim, you can open up your hand so that only your thumb is left in the mouth, and she would have clamped down on it. When that fish is ready to go, she'll open her mouth, and then she's gone.
She's gone.
And it's a nice, soft release. You're not spearing them in, slapping them about. That's the beauty of the glove. It's a nice, soft release.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What I want to move on to is we'll try and give the anglers a bit of an idea how to let's focus over the next 3 months. Where are we? We just hit the start of summer. If you're going to go into a system, and we'll start in your locals, so somewhere up the mid-north coast, whereabouts in the system and what sort of structure are you looking for? If you want to pick a system, that's up to you, but just basic knowledge for people that want to target these big fish.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so I tend to find that the bigger fish tend to be in the bottom half of the system. If you're targeting them in the mid-north coast, around about their spawning time, so say October, November, December, you should see most of your fish in the lower part of the system. Yeah. And I find that if I can find a flat 1 or 2 kilometres from the actual mouth. That's generally where they'll be hanging in that part of the system. You'll certainly get them up the back of systems. There's no doubt about that. But at that time of the year, if I'm fishing the mid-north coast, that's the area I'm looking for. If you're fishing the southern part of New South Wales or northern Victoria, Gippsland areas, places like that, it'll change a little bit. They're a little bit later than us. You might want to start that in November and it might be December, January. But that same rule of closeness to the mouth generally holds true for tidal systems. In places like Mallacoota or, say, Conjola or St George's Basin, not so much. It's that system's slightly different, and that can be governed more at times by wind and moon and all sorts of different things.
Sure.
But going back to the mid-north coast and what system I'd be looking at, so we've found our flat. We're 1 or 2 kilometres in from the mouth. We're looking for a flat that's holding life.
Right.
You'll see some flats that are just hard-packed sand, and there's no nipper holes, there's no ray holes, there's nothing on it. They are generally pretty barren areas. You may get the odd fish on them, but not often.
Yeah.
You want to find life. If you find the bait, you'll find the fish. So once we've identified a flat, we're 1 or 2 k's in, we've found life, we've found bait. Now we'd want to look at water movement, and we want to see what that water's, and this is particularly towards, in reference to tidal systems. We want to see where that bait is being pushed to. So if you have a sand flat that's in the middle, you've got water going around either side, your big fish will be sitting on either side of that parting line where that current splits into. One side may be stronger in flow than the other, and generally the stronger flow is the area that they'll be sitting in because there's more bait, there's more opportunities for them there. You want to look at structure like any sort of hole or divot or change in the bottom strata, weed, little clumps of weed, big clumps of weed. No weed. You don't need weed. Don't get me wrong. You don't need weed to find flathead. I fish a number of flats all along the coast of New South Wales and don't have a spot of weed on them.
Sure.
But they do have different structure, and that might be you'll have a exposed piece of sand in a little island and then the flat is around it or off to the left or whatever. You'll see, you want to see little clumps of, say, mangroves if you can find that, old stumps, anything like that. Any piece of structure you find will hold life. And if you can find life or bait or activity, you'll find flathead.
Yeah.
But one mistake we see with people, and this is talking about any sort of structure, whether we talk about the structure as just a sand flat itself, is how people are approaching it. And the best way to approach it is to incrementally cast your way to it. Don't rush into it. Don't rush to a stump and start firing casts at the base of it, because time and time again, we're seeing those bigger fish at 10, 15, 20, 30 feet out from that structure, because that structure is holding the bait. That's what they're feeding on. If they rush in there, they scatter it. If they sit on the edge, they've only got to wait for an opportunity of fish perhaps wandering too far or darting out to get their own little feed, and bingo, they're gone. So that's the sort of structure we like. Deep water nearby is always a good thing to look for.
Yeah.
If you're fishing bays and basins and things like that, again, you'll see probably more weed for one, and weed edges, drop-offs. They're the sort of structures you'll be looking for. Also, channels that are coming into the system, or you might want to be looking at those shallower optioned areas where they might be quite vast. St George's Basin's got some huge areas there. Those sort of areas still have different structure. They're up and down, and there's little deep pockets and little shallow pockets and little sandbars and things like that. Look for that structure. Try and see that there is some life there. It's so important. If you can see prawns flicking or bait flicking, or you can even hear it. If you can hear whiting or brim feeding, there'll be a flathead nearby. They're that opportunistic. They'll always be hanging around those types of areas.
Yeah, okay. All right. While you're talking about current flow and all that sort of stuff, what's your thoughts on bringing the lure back with the current or across the current, or just allowing the current to drag it downstream? Do you have a sort of a perfect scenario of how you'd like to cast in relation to the current?
No, not really. I've cast in every direction you can think of from the boat or from shore, and I don't find that current will stop the flathead from taking the lure. It doesn't look unnatural to them. Fish move through the current, or while they're moving with the current, it's probably a more natural presentation. But if I'm drifting a flat and the current's taking me towards the sand flat, I'll be casting towards the sand flat and working the lure against the current.
Okay.
If once I come round that flat and I come down the side of it, then I'll be bringing across the side of the current. So I'll be side on to the current.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've caught fish firing lures up into the current. It doesn't seem to play a big part of it. Much like wind, we've cast into wind and still hooked up to big fish. Wind won't put them off, and even a really strong wind won't bother them too much. It's uncomfortable to fish, and it's hard to get a hook set because you've got such a belly in your line.
Yeah.
But really strong winds, we've picked up some huge fish in howling gales. So wind doesn't affect them at all.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's really interesting. And likewise with the 195s, because it's such a weighty lure, although it's definitely better to cast with the wind, you can punch it up into the wind if that's where your structure is, which I think is quite helpful.
Exactly right, yeah. And that's one of the beauties of the 195. You can fish a boat of 3 or 4 anglers or 2 mates, and you can fire that lure into any direction you like, and it won't suffer too much. Of course, if you're casting into the wind, try and keep your trajectory low, and if you're casting with the wind, try to keep your trajectory high.
Yeah.
That's about the only difference. We find fishing that 195, you really want a reasonable sort of a medium heavy action rod. At the moment, I'm using a St. Croix 7 foot. I think it's 8 to 14 pound.
Okay.
While 7 foot is probably a little short for me, I prefer longer rods. I'd recommend that the gear to throw the 195, I'd be looking at 7 foot minimum. I like the St. Croix, but it is a pain to cart around because it's one piece. I have used some really nice travel rods out of Jabbers. We get their hooks as well. Jabbers do a 5-piece travel rod, which is a really nice thing. A rod called a Beast Flogger.
Okay.
It's quite handy for that, yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
I also use a Jabbers rod for throwing the 155, which is a rod called the Fin Raiser.
Okay.
It's a good rod if you don't run long leaders like me. I only run short leaders on the 155, but it's not really well suited to long leaders because it has a very small eye in the tip.
Yeah.
If you're throwing the 110, there's so many good little budget rods out there. Any of the Rack Raiders or the Brim Raiders or anything like that. Again, 7'6", 1 to 4 or 2 to 4 kilo. Max that up to a little 1,000 reel. The Fin Raiser, I run a little 2,500 on it, and the St. Croix, I run a 3,000 on it.
Okay. And in terms of leaders, if we go back up to the 195, exactly what sort of length leader are you thinking, and what sort of weight class?
Okay, I use 20 pound, and it seems heavy for flathead. There is method in the madness. The 20 pound will allow you to repetitively cast that 195 because being quite a hefty lure, light leaders tend to wear through quite quickly.
Sure.
And you'll end up snapping that lure off, and then you've got the hassle of having to go and collect it.
You got to go and find it.
Yeah, and they cast a bloody mile, and it can be a pain to find. So, yeah, I use 20 pound. I normally use around a 50 to 70 centimetre leader.
Okay.
And I just use a double Albright knot because I'm not bringing it up through the eyelet. If I'm using a long leader, if I want to use a long leader, which we do at times, I definitely suggest that you learn to tie the FG and use that.
Sure.
The beauty of the long leader, now this brings us to another little thing. You can use your leader as a tool to change how that lure works in depth.
Okay.
And what I mean by saying that is that a long leader of fluorocarbon, and we all know that fluorocarbon sinks, a long leader, as you're working that 195 towards you, that long leader will actually allow you to pull that lure down just that bit deeper.
Sure.
So if you're on a flat and it's not 300 or 400 mils, it's not 700 or 800 mils, let's say it's a metre or 1.2 metres, that long leader is a good way to be able to pull that lure right down and bring it down 2 or 3 feet so that you're still in the zone for those big flathead and they don't have to rise too much.
Sure.
The really big fish will take a bit of time to rise to a lure, and so the long leader will give you that ability to cut that time down and increase your hookup rates.
Okay.
So that's just another little trick that we use. I know a few anglers that are putting nose hooks on.
Okay.
Yeah, which
That's
is
crazy.
You wouldn't think it was a terribly good idea, but I tell you what, it amazes you how many times they hook up on that nose hook.
Yeah. it makes you wonder
Surprising, yeah.
where the flathead's targeting the lure, whether it's trying to take it nose first, or they can be a bit clumsy, or have the lack of vision is probably a better way to put it. But yeah, what they're thinking, I guess.
Yeah, we've been thinking about it. We've come up with the ideas that we think what's happening is that after they've struck that lure, they actually turn the lure head first towards them.
Okay.
That's what they would do in a natural situation.
Yeah.
To swallow spiky, like a brim or things like that. They're going to swallow it head first.
Yeah, that's right. So they are trying to turn it around.
It was a surprise. But yeah, that's another little tool that you can use a little nose hook on there.
Yeah.
So there's other little tricks and things. And that's the beauty of the Crossfire. It's so versatile and you can do so much with it.
Mm.
We even know a few customers that are buying the 110s and they're actually drop shotting.
Okay. So how's that work?
Okay, so what they're doing is it's a modification of a thing called a Tokyo rig. So they're making up a little stainless steel bar about 3 or 4 inches long. On one end, it's got a teardrop sinker. On the other end, it's got your main leader.
Mm-hmm.
About 30 or 40 centimetres up from that, they've got a dropper, a single line dropper going out with, they've got a 110 Crossfire on that.
Okay.
They then drop that behind the boat and they just drift with that sitting out behind the boat. And they'll be targeting deeper water generally, normally about 2 metres.
Yep.
And while that's going on, they are flicking other Crossfires in at shallow bank edges as they go past.
Right.
So, yeah, it blew me away that they're doing it because I never thought it.
No. So basically they're travelling along in whatever direction they're travelling, that sinker's bumping along the bottom, bouncing up and down and giving that Crossfire action somewhere in the middle of the water column.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just above weed or it's a crazy idea. It never occurred to us.
Wow.
And they're generally doing it while they're drifting.
Yeah.
Because the lure is buoyant, it sits up nicely and just the slow drift will keep it from rising right up and tangling into your main line. And it just sits there and twitches about as you drift along, which I thought was pretty out of the box thinking.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I wouldn't have considered it. But yeah, there's some clever fellows out there. Another thing that I wanted to pick your brain on, like I fished them a bit over the couple of years and I've dropped a lot of fish. So what are your thoughts on setting hooks and that sort of stuff?
Look, I tend to set my hooks pretty savagely. I run a fairly light drag, especially in the 110. So when I've got weight and I know that my fish has struck well, I do lift into that fish.
Yeah.
I don't go mad. I don't rip the hell out of it,
yeah.
But I do lift into that fish. And then when I get a bit of a lunge and a bit of movement off that fish, I'll give 2 more nice, solid hook sets into it.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that I'm finding that with the surface strikes, they don't always connect particularly well. And one of the reasons is that you may not have hooked that fish in the mouth.
Yeah.
And you might be hooked into the top of its head, and it's quite bony and hard.
Yeah.
So you want to try and get as much purchase into that fish as you can.
Yeah.
And, you've got to set that hook. But you've also got to have a light drag. And what I normally do is I just put a hand on the spool, a spare hand on the spool, and just lift into it. Just the fingers, not my spare hand. I don't have 3. But just the fingers of the hand that's holding the rod. I just extend those out and I stop that reel from stripping line just by putting pressure on it with a couple of fingers. And then you give it a couple of good hard jerks into that fish and try and stay connected to them. And it is hard to get into them at times. It is just one of those things. That's just the nature of surface fishing. Yes. And we've just got to come to the point where we accept that not every hookup is going to be successful, because we're really blazing a bit of a new trail in doing this sort of stuff. And it has its pros and cons. And one of those issues is that you don't always get every fish that strikes.
Yeah.
We get a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
We quite happily outfish a lot of other methods.
Sure. I was going to say, I was fishing the other day with him. I was talking to a mate on the phone as I caught this fish, and I've gone, no, that's all good. I can see like 4 hook points in it, and one was in the back of the head. As soon as it went in the net, I couldn't see the points and the barbs of the hook. They were gone, but as soon as it went in the net, those fell out, and then the other one fell out of the mouth. So
yeah. That's happened to me a few times. Very similar. It's one of those things. They're throwing their head around. They're slashing and shaking and hooks are moving, and you really do need to set that hook and set it quite firmly. Don't go mad. You're not poling tuna, but make sure it's a good solid jab and you want to stick it to them. Often when I'm fighting fish and I know when a treble's let go, I can feel it through the rod and I can feel it through the line, and I'll know. And there's always that heart in the mouth moment you go, are we going to stay connected? And I'm a bit like that with every single fish that I catch. I'm hoping they'll all hold together. And that's the excitement and the fun that we get out of it is, are we going to win? We don't want to win every time. It's a sport. No, I enjoy the sport.
Yeah. Okay. And then if for people that go, okay, I want to give this a go, in terms of your range, where would be a good starting point for lures? Because a lot of people are not going to be able to go out and buy every one. Do you have a starting point, I guess?
Look, if I was first starting out, I would give them the advice that was my journey in a nutshell. And I started with the 110. Now, the 110 is only a light lure. It's only a small lure. You don't need specialised gear. Standard brim gear will throw it. You want about 4-pound main line, about a 14-pound leader. Keep your leader short, about 50, 60 centimetres. Use the techniques that we've covered. Throw it out, let it settle. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. Look for that structure. Look for your sand flats and go out and do it. And it's that simple. We tend to get a better hookup rate on the 110 than we do on the 195, believe it or not. I suppose it's because it's a smaller target.
Yeah.
But the 110 will produce more fish than the 195, but it will produce fish of all sizes. You'll get anything from tiny little tiddlers of 20 centimetres up to fish, and my PB on the 110 at the moment is a 98.5.
Oh, big fish.
Yeah, a great fish and a great fight. It was on very light gear. I was solo. I had to net it myself. It was really exciting. There was probably 8 or 9 times during that fight I didn't know whether I was going to land that fish.
Yeah.
It was great fun. I actually filmed the whole thing from start to finish. I missed the strike, which was a bugger.
Yeah.
But I filmed the whole thing, and you can see that we've got a YouTube channel called Crossy's Fishing Adventures.
Sure.
You can jump on there, and it's titled, I think we call it Old Bar Beast. And Old Bar was the area that we caught it in.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah, very exciting fishing. It was shallow water, and it was just such good fun. And the finesse of the 110 really gets my blood going. I love fishing the 110. I like the finesse of it, the light action. You tend to get longer, better runs. But, again, you probably won't be targeting those bigger fish as well, because once you go up to the next size, which is the 155, our newest size, that size will take you up a level. So you can then progress from the 110 to the 155. And the 155 is a bit of a bridging size between the two, between the 110 and the 195. And again, it's still finesse. You can still fish it very light. It's still a lot of fun, but you will start to upgrade those bigger fish. You'll start to see more fish in your 70s, 80s and 90s. Yeah. And, of course, once you've mastered the 155, then, okay, go up to the 195. And then you'll really start to be targeting big fish consistently. And by the time your journey is taking you that far, there's not much more I'll be able to tell them, because they've been through that they've done the same thing that I've done. So they're on the same trajectory. And their own theories and their own observations will start to come to the fore. And it's a learning curve. And I get so excited about it. I'm hopeless. I'm an absolute flathead tragic. I'm terrible. It's, watching other people. I mean, the number of customers that we have ring us back and message us back saying we've just landed our first 90 or we've just landed our fifth 90 over their crossfire journey. It's really great stuff and incredibly satisfying as a lure maker.
Yeah, look, it is such an exciting way to fish. The first time I had a really big fish hit a 195, the only way I can describe it is if someone was out there standing in the middle of the flat with a paddle trying to make as much water splashing as they could make with a paddle. That's what the fish was hitting like, and you jump, it gets your heart going. It's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it is. For me, it's all top water. I love anything top water, but I fell in love with flathead years ago. And when I first started chasing flathead on the surface, I was told I was mad. And there was nobody. I didn't know anybody that was doing it. Nobody. And it was weird. And then it's just grown and grown. And now it's so great to see that it's now slowly becoming a mainstream option for anglers.
Yeah. It's like I said, just a thrilling way to chase big flathead. So yeah, I can't recommend it enough to everyone. All right, mate. There's a couple more things there's just two more things that I want to cover before we head off. The other thing would be, what other species are people regularly getting on these lures?
Oh, that's a terrific question.
It's a big question.
It's crazy. Look, we get photos sent to us from all over Australia, and now we're starting to get them from overseas as well.
Yeah.
So in Australian waters, we're seeing anything from Spanish mackerel, queenfish, God, you name it. Some of the more surprising things is the 230 becoming really popular as a coral trout lure up on the reefs, in the shallow reefs.
Right.
Working exceptionally well and really dialing in some very big trout. Some of the trout we've seen photo centres, Colby Lesko sent a few photos into us, and we've had, off the back of that, 9 or 10 other anglers really starting to just get into it, and they are really making some inroads. And again, we're seeing new theories and new knowledge coming up as we learn more about these fish because we can see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an exciting new thing that's happening. We've seen people switch bait them for sailfish.
Really?
Yeah, I've done that myself in a few places. Okay. One thing we wanted to do, I'm keen to go to the northern end of Fraser Island and target small marlin on the 195 and the 155.
Wow.
I think that could be a lot of fun. That's on the bucket list. If we go overseas, we're now sending lures into the UK, Norway, Sweden, South America, and the US, and we're seeing some really strange fish coming out of South America, let me tell you. And we've seen, wolffish. They're a bloody incredible looking critter with huge fangs, 7 or 8 inches long, sticking up on either side of the bottom jaw. Peacock bass, spot-tail bass. We've seen clown knife fish. There's been people chasing snakehead on them. Like, the list just goes on and on. It's just crazy. At some point, we're going to do a collage for one of our customers out of California who goes down and fishes South America quite a lot and sends us a lot of content, sends us heaps and heaps of photos. He's a real character. And he sent some weird fish and stuff we couldn't identify. We've never seen them before. We don't know what they are.
Right. That's very interesting.
Yeah, they've caught a lot of different stuff. I often see lures, some overseas lures coming into the country, and then on the list of the pack it'll say, it'll catch flathead and kingfish and tuna and blah, blah, blah. I never actually see those lures hanging out of those fish.
Yeah.
So we've been chasing kingfish on the 195 and the 155 quite successfully recently. The 230, I wish I'd had a 230 with me that day. But, yeah, we did really well on kingfish with them. So they're a good land-based lure as well. Because of their weight, you can spear them out quite a distance. But, yeah, there's so many different species. We do a little 75 model as well, which has turned out to be quite handy on jungle perch.
Right.
It holds its own against whiting, brim. It's been really successful on rainbow trout.
Yep.
And the 110, it's the 110 in the galaxy colour has just been absolutely braining the bass.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely braining it. Yeah, if the fish eats other fish or eats other things, a crossfire can catch it.
Yeah, very good, mate. That's an extensive list. So yeah, all right. Where I think from last time, your list has expanded. Where can people acquire the crossfire lures? Are they in lots of tackle shops or just online? What's the best way to go? No,
we stock a number of shops in Queensland. Doug Burt's Tackle World. In New South Wales, we've got Fergo's at Tarrant Point and the Gong. You can also get them in Nowra from McCallum's. You can get them in Narooma from Ocean Hut.
Yep.
We've got a lot of stockists. If a listener goes into a stockist and they can't find our product there, they can go online at www.crossfirelures.com.au. We have an online store.
Yep.
But you can also go to your local tackle shop and tell them to give us a ring and we will stock them. It's that simple.
Sure. Simple as that. So pretty easy. All right. And I'll go 2 final questions. Where can people, if people have got any questions they might like to ask you, is there somewhere they can reach out?
Yes, of course. Yep. They can reach us through our website or on Facebook. We're on Instagram as well. So it's pretty easy to get in contact with us. There's contact phone number there that'll take them directly to me, and they can speak to me. We speak to customers all the time.
Very good. Okay. So I've got one final question, but what I want to do is just thank you for coming on. Look, for me personally, it's been a great chat on something that it's a bit out of my wheelhouse in terms of it's not Brem, but it's something that excites me a lot, and I appreciate you taking the time to have a chat to me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us on. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Now, the last thing I've got to talk about is something we spoke about before, is that I'd like to, if you can remember, is to tell us a big fish story or a fish story that sticks in your mind, and we'll run out with that.
Big fish story. Wow.
Yeah.
So many. Which one to choose?
A big one. Exciting one.
An exciting one. Let me think. Okay. I think we covered the one slapping the lure with the chin. That was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that was great.
The one that turned. Maybe it was that PB 98 from Old Bar. That was probably one of the most exciting captures I've had. It was on the 110. It was super fun. And it was one of those days where just the conditions were right. Everything was just right. The water had just the lightest ripple of breeze on it. I had a good drift going. I was in water so shallow I couldn't put the electric down. The boat was only just clearing the bottom, and that was, I think back in those days, I had a little 395 Quinny.
Okay.
So you don't need a big boat to do this. Is the other beauty of shallow water flathead. I was on a solo run. I was just coming down the top of the flat, and the flat had everything I needed. It had deep water on one side, a shallow channel on the other side. It had weed in little tiny patches about the size of a drink bottle, every sort of 8 or 9 feet. It had lots and lots of nipper holes. It had small fish and bait fish flicking and moving, and you could see the flat was alive. There was life.
Yeah.
And I'd cast the lure out, and it had hit the water, and it was just sitting there. I hadn't done anything with it. And the rings had just dissipated, and I was doing something else. I can't remember what I was doing. I turned away to do something, and while I was turned away, I just gave the rod a couple of little flicks while I wasn't even watching it, and I heard it. And I just heard this massive splash, and I stood up and looked back out to where the lure was, and there was a ring left from where the lure had disappeared the size of a car bonnet.
Right.
And I thought, holy hell, what's happened here? And I felt no weight, and I wound up, and then I thought, I'm just going to strike on suspicion, and I hit this beast, and off it went, and did it go. And it stripped off about 30 or 40 metres of line, and it was a long way out. And at this point, I had been experimenting with super light lines, mainly to get casting distance. So I was fishing 2-pound main line, which was bloody stupid. But anyway, that's what happened. I had, I think, 14-pound leader on, and I couldn't move the boat because I couldn't get the electric in. I had no way of changing my drift. So I had to work this fish from out wide and bring it in. And it was a win and then a loss, and then a win and then a loss. It was a seesaw battle right to my feet. And I think that particular fish epitomised for me the fun and the sport in using crossfires. And that will always stick with me, that fish. I've caught plenty of other fish, 98.5 and 90s and 96s, 97s and things like that. But that fish really stuck out for me. It was something that will, it's one of those memorable fish that you'll remember forever.
Mate, that is a fantastic story. All right, mate, I want to thank you again. And, mate, hopefully I get to have a chat to you again in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. For free show notes, downloads, tools and resources, please visit our website on doclures.com or consider supporting the show by joining Team Doc Lures to receive exclusive members-only episodes, tools and resources. But for now, tight lines and may the fish be with you.
Discover new opportunities together in a new Chevy. Meet up in an Equinox, winner of the J.D. Power Award for initial quality among compact SUVs. Lend a hand in the strong and capable Silverado. or mix it up into high-tech tracks with an available 11-inch diagonal touchscreen. Find family, friends, and fun in the Chevy that's right for you. Click to learn more. Chevrolet, together let's drive. For J.D. Power 2023 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.